Hello nerds, and welcome to the fastest YouTube video I've ever filmed. I have to be out of the house in about 20 minutes, but light is fading, so I'm gonna do this as quickly as I can. Today I will be doing my winter recommendations video, and for that I've chosen books that aren't necessarily what you would deem cozy reads, but instead books that reflect my perception of winter. And I have lived in Norway and England, so I feel like I know what I'm talking about. And for me, winter is cold, it's gray, it's miserable, it's depressing, and those are the vibes that I'm trying to give to you today. So without further ado, I'm gonna get into the first book. So that is a book that I have talked about before, and it is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. The way that I would describe this is Alias Grace, but set in Iceland. This is based on a true story of a woman who has been accused of murdering 2 men, I believe, or 1 man, I don't remember. And we are basically following her as she is awaiting trial or sentencing. It's set over a year while she lives in this cabin in a remote part of Iceland, which at this time was pretty much all of Iceland. And it talks a lot about this kind of gray, sad, miserable weather. And I personally love this book. I love the atmosphere of it, and I think it's a great book to read if you want to feel even more depressed this winter. The next book I'm going to talk about is part of a series. I don't necessarily recommend the series because I thought that the rest of the books weren't the best, but the first one I really liked, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. So this is a kind of fantasy novel set in Russia in... When is this set?
Wow.
Bear and the Nightingale? Like 1200s? So it is set in 12 to 1300s Russia. It's before Russia really becomes what we know as Russia today. It's, you know, loose. It's people who are living sort of all across what is now the Russian state. And there is just a lot of kind of threats from, you know, these bands that are coming from the east and those bands from the west, Cossacks, Mongols, all that kind of stuff. And we follow Vasya, who is a young girl. She is in her early teens, and she is magical in some way, shape, or form, and she is able to commune with these kinds of Russian folkloric creatures. And for me, it reminded me a lot of the type of creatures that you get in Norwegian folklore, and this is a little bit more cozy than the other books that I will be mentioning. And it's a very good sort of Bildungsroman adventure story, I think, and it is cute. It's cute. It is very fairy tale-esque, so if you're not a fan of the fairy tale style of writing, then this probably isn't for you. But if you are and you're looking for something that's just kind of a very quick read and has a adventure sense to it, then I would definitely go for The Bear and the Nightingale. And you can read the rest of the series if you're so inclined. So the next book is a fairly recent read, and that is The River Within by Karen Powell. This was sent to me by Europa Books, and this is a book set in Yorkshire in the 1950s. It is a Hamlet retelling, and I believe that the atmosphere that is described in this book, this kind of withering, gray, windy Yorkshire setting, is just everything winter is to me, coupled with the sort of coldness of the various characters. If I remember correctly, Hamlet is set in Denmark, which is obviously a Scandinavian country, a cold country, so it channels that kind of feel as well. And it's just hella depressing. So definitely pick this up to feel sad in the winter. Why not? It's been such a good year. I mean, honestly, for me, it's not a book that made me depressed or anything like that, but it's definitely not got a happy ending if that's what you're looking for. But yeah, I'm babbling. I am just babbling. The next book is set in my lovely home country of Norway, and that is the Mercies by Karen Millwood Hargrave. Oh, you can't see shit. This is a historical fiction novel. It is set in the 17th century. You have a small fishing community in the north of Norway where the men have all been killed by a storm. And we basically follow these women as they try to pick their lives back up and have a community where there are influences of both sort of traditional Norwegian practices and elements of Sami shamanistic culture, with the rise of witch hunting represented in the form of a character who is coming to us from England, who at the time is under the rule of King James I, who was a notorious witch hunter and massive misogynist. We hate him. So it is a very interesting feminist retelling, and I did enjoy it. It wasn't my favorite book. I had very high expectations for this because of the setting, but I did really like it. Yeah, I think it's a good winter read, and I think most people will like it. So my next pick is a graphic novel, and that is the Encyclopedia of Early Earth by Isabel Greenberg. So this is set in the North Pole, or Arctic region, and we are basically following characters that are telling each other the story of early Earth, and it's kind of like an alternative genesis of Earth. And as you can see, if the sun will allow me to show you, you've got really cool style, and she's kind of sparse with the colors that she uses. I believe it's portraying indigenous people to the Arctic region. It's cool, it's a very quick read, and Isabel Greenberg has a lot of representation in her graphic novels, and I think that most people will love this book if they give it a try. Both me and Sam have read this and loved it a lot, so that's a recommendation from me to you. You already know that because you're watching this video. Anyway, so on to my non-fiction portion. The books that I want to recommend to you to read this winter, 2020, or any other winter, I don't care. Firstly, I want to talk about Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology. This is Neil Gaiman's version of Norse mythology. It basically tells the genesis story of Earth and the universe in Norse mythology. He goes through the most famous and I'd say kind of integral stories in Norse mythology, and I obviously, having grown up in Norway, recognized a lot of these characters and some of these stories. I think the most famous one would be the one in which Thor is convinced to dress up as a woman in order to get his hammer back from somebody who's stolen it. I am not typically a fan of Neil Gaiman's writing, but I did actually like this book, and I just relished the opportunity to refamiliarize myself with these stories because it has been a few years since I have read any Norse mythology. It's not something that I tend to pick up, and Neil Gaiman himself is obviously very influenced by this type of mythology in his work. I have read American Gods, which, even though it talks about gods from sort of all cultures, it does focus on a couple of Norse gods. I just think this is I think for anybody out there who is a fan of fantasy, this is worth picking up because there's a lot of Norse mythology woven into fantasy because of the father of fantasy, Tolkien, having a particular like for Norse mythology, and basically, you know, taking a lot of elements of it into his work. So yeah, definitely check it out. It's very easy to read, and yeah, it's got my stamp of approval for whatever that's worth. And then I have Erebus by Michael Palin. I've kind of thrown this in just because I love Michael Palin, and I just think he needs my support. Poor thing. He's really struggling in his career, so I'm here for him if he needs me. This is a book in which Michael Palin talks about the ship Erebus. What Erebus is most famous for is firstly Antarctic and sort of southern region exploration from the early 19th century. It was used to chart large swaths of Antarctica. Later on, it was used to find a northwest passage in the Arctic region, but sadly what happened instead was that Erebus and its sister ship, the Terror, ended up being stranded in the Arctic, and everybody on board died, and there were rumors of cannibalism and all sorts of very depressing things. There is a fiction book based around this story that I personally wouldn't read because the guy who wrote it, like, is an asshole, and I don't think he believes in climate change, which is weird. But you can watch the TV series if you'd like to. Jared Harris is in it, and I also love Jared Harris, so that's a shout out from me to him. But yeah, so in this book, it's kind of like just a very casual, informal narrative, and Michael Palin, who not only is a comedian and writer, is also somebody who is known for his travel writing and travel documentaries. So in this book, he basically follows the route that Erebus took and goes to the places where the ship had been, and so he peppers that in with the narrative that he's telling. So yeah, definitely check this out if you're interested. The last book that I'm going to talk about is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I believe I've talked about this before. If you don't know about this, this is Jon Krakauer's version of events from the 1996 Everest expedition. That was a year in Everest's history which has been one of the most fatal, and one of the expeditions which Krakauer happened to be on lost lots of members. It was a highly controversial event in Everest's history, which tends to be quite controversial anyway, because of the influence of commercialization and this kind of like tourist industry that is now in place. And I think it was last year that there was a picture that went viral of basically this queue of people trying to get to the top of Everest, and it's just, it really, this book kind of talks about how that has happened. The toughest area to climb in the world, as well as just a place that human beings should not be, has now turned into, like, you know, a queue in the post office. So yeah, this is a very upsetting read, and I wouldn't say it's for the faint-hearted, but I found it very cool. And there is also, in my edition, in the updated second edition, there is a section in which Jon Krakauer basically answers his critics, because as I say, this is his version of events, and a lot of people disagreed because they felt that it put a lot of blame on their family members who are no longer here to defend themselves, and it's quite dramatic. But yeah, so I've obviously picked this because Everest is snowy. I don't know if you knew that, and there is a lot of grim, cold darkness to this book. So yeah, Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. What time is it? Right, so I basically have to go now. I'm very quickly going to go through my winter TBR. So these are books that you can also check out, but I can't speak to the quality of them because I haven't read them yet. One is One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Sam told me to make sure that I knew how to pronounce that name before I came on here. This is, I think, based on Solzhenitsyn's own experiences in the gulags of the Soviet Union. Yeah? Yeah. It's a very short book. It's very sad. You know, gulags, Siberia. Need I say more? The next is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I have not read any Le Guin before, but I have heard great things about her, and she is obviously a very important female writer. So yeah, I've got this on my list, and I believe it's set in a snowy, icy, cold land, so we'll see about that. Then I have Cold Mountain by Charles Fraser. I don't know very much about this. I know that there was that movie that I haven't seen, and yeah, I think it's set during
Confederate soldier who gets shot and gets back to his loved one.
I don't know if you can hear that, but it's
Jude Law is handsome.
Jude Law is handsome, according to Sam. Yeah, it's set during the Civil War, and it's called Cold Mountain. There's snow and shit on the cover, and everybody looks really grim in the movie, apart from Jude Law and Nicole Kidman, who, oh my god, yeah, dropped a bunch of books. Apart from Jude Law and Nicole Kidman, who obviously have to look hot, because, you know, that's what you're paying for. Next up, I have got The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. No idea how to say that. This is about a couple in the 1920s who live in Alaska. They have lost their child, and I think they like create a child out of snow, and it's eerie and sad and cold and set in Alaska. Then I have Peter the Great by Robert K. Massey, the expert of Russian biographies. This is about Peter the Great, the Tsar who basically dragged Russia into the Western sphere, and the way that he did that is partly by introducing shipbuilding and that kind of stuff. So this is a fat book. Sam has told me to read it ages. I did read quite a bit of it, but stopped because my attention span sucks, and I want to get to it this winter. And as I say, it's set in Russia and Northern Europe. It's cold, Sweden's involved. You know the drill. Robert K. Massey was great at writing these types of books. This won the Pulitzer Prize at some point, don't know when, and it looks stunning. That's all I have today, guys. I have to run now and pick up some markers for my burgeoning bookmark business. Check that out. I will put the links down below. Check me out on Patreon. Check me out on Instagram. Check me out anywhere that you want. Remember to stay interested, and I will see you soon. Bye.